Chapter 20 of Agnes Grey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. Chapter 20. The Farewell. A house in A—, the fashionable watering place, was hired for our seminary, and a promise of 2 or 3 pupils was obtained to commence with. I returned to Horton Lodge about the middle of July, leaving my mother to conclude the bargain for the house, to obtain more pupils, to sell off the furniture of our old abode, and to fit out the new one. We often pity the poor, because they have no leisure to mourn their departed relatives, and necessity obliges them to labour through their severest afflictions. But is not active employment the best remedy for overwhelming sorrow, the surest antidote for despair? It may be a rough comforter, it may seem hard to be harassed with the cares of life when we have no relish for its enjoyments, to be goaded to labour when the heart is ready to break, and the vexed spirit implores for the rest only to weep in silence. But is not labour better than the rest we covet? And are not those petty, tormenting cares less hurtful than a continual brooding over the great affliction that oppresses us? Besides, we cannot have cares and anxieties and toil without hope, if it be but the hope of fulfilling our joyless task, accomplishing some needful project, or escaping some further annoyance. At any rate, I was glad my mother had so much employment for every faculty of her action-loving frame. Our kind neighbours lamented that she, once so exalted in wealth and station, should be reduced to such extremity in her time of sorrow. But I am persuaded that she would have suffered thrice as much had she been left in affluence, with liberty to remain in that house, the scene of her early happiness and late affliction, and no stern necessity to prevent her from incessantly brooding over and lamenting her bereavement. I will not dilate upon the feelings with which I left the old house, the well-known garden, the little village church, then doubly dear to me, because my father, who, for 30 years, had taught and prayed within its walls, lay slumbering now beneath its flags, and the old bare hills, delightful in their very desolation, with narrow vales between, smiling in green wood and sparkling water, the house where I was born, the scene of all my early associations, the place where throughout life my earthly affections had been centred, and left them to return no more. True, I was going back to Horton Lodge, where, amid many evils, one source of pleasure yet remained, but it was pleasure mingled with excessive pain, and my stay, alas, was limited to 6 weeks. And even of that precious time, day after day slipped by, and I did not see him, except at church. I never saw him for a fortnight after my return. It seemed a long time to me, and as I was often out with my rambling pupil, of course hopes would keep rising, and disappointments would ensue, and then I would say to my own heart, "Here is a convincing proof, if you would but have the sense to see it, or the candour to acknowledge it, that he does not care for you. If he only thought half as much about you as you do about him, he would have contrived to meet you many times ere this. You must know that, by consulting your own feelings. Therefore have done with this nonsense. You have no ground for hope. Dismiss at once these hurtful thoughts and foolish wishes from your mind, and turn to your own duty and the dull blank life that lies before you. You might have known such happiness was not for you. But I saw him at last. He came suddenly upon me as I was crossing a field in returning from a visit to Nancy Brown, which I had taken the opportunity of paying while Matilda Murray was riding her matchless mare. He must have heard of the heavy loss I had sustained. He expressed no sympathy, offered no condolence, but almost the first words he uttered were, "How is your mother?" And this was no matter of course question, for I never told him that I had a mother. He must have learned the fact from others, if he knew it at all, and besides there was sincere goodwill, and even deep, touching, unobtrusive sympathy in the tone and manner of the inquiry. I thanked him with due civility, and told him she was as well as could be expected. "What will she do?" was the next question. Many would have deemed it an impertinent one, and given an evasive reply, but such an idea never entered my head, and I gave a brief but plain statement of my mother's plans and prospects. "Then you will leave this place shortly?" said he. "Yes, in a month." He paused a minute, as if in thought. When he spoke again, I hoped it would be to express his concern at my departure, but it was only to say, "I should think you will be willing enough to go?" "Yes, for some things," I replied. "For some things only? I wonder what should make you regret it?" I was annoyed at this, in some degree, because it embarrassed me. I had only one reason for regretting it, and that was a profound secret, which he had no business to trouble me about. "Why," said I, "why should you suppose that I dislike the place?" "You told me so yourself," was the decisive reply. "You said, at least, that you could not live contentedly without a friend, and that you had no friend here, and no possibility of making one. And, besides, I know you must dislike it." "But if you remember rightly, I said, or meant to say, I could not live contentedly without a friend in the world. I was not so unreasonable as to require one always near me. I think I could be happy in a house full of enemies, if—but no, that sentence must not be continued." I paused, and hastily added, "And besides, we cannot well leave a place where we have lived for 2 or 3 years, without some feeling of regret." "Will you regret to part with Miss Murray, your sole remaining pupil and companion?" "I dare say I shall in some degree. It was not without sorrow I parted with her sister." "I can imagine that." "Well, Miss Matilda is quite as good, better in one respect." "What is that?" "She's honest." "And the other is not?" "I should not call her dishonest, but it must be confessed she's a little artful." "Artful, is she? I saw she was giddy and vain; and now," he added, after a pause, "I can well believe she was artful too, but so excessively so as to assume an aspect of extreme simplicity and unguarded openness. Yes," continued he, musingly, "that accounts for some little things that puzzled me a trifle before." After that, he turned the conversation to more general subjects. He did not leave me till we had nearly reached the park gates. He had certainly stepped a little out of his way to accompany me so far, for he now went back and disappeared down Moss Lane, the entrance of which we had passed some time before. Assuredly I did not regret this circumstance. If sorrow had any place in my heart, it was that he was gone at last, that he was no longer walking by my side, and that that short interval of delightful intercourse was at an end. He had not breathed a word of love, or dropped one hint of tenderness or affection, and yet I had been supremely happy. To be near him, to hear him talk as he did talk, and to feel that he thought me worthy to be so spoken to, capable of understanding and duly appreciating such discourse, was enough. Yes, Edward Weston, I could indeed be happy in a house full of enemies, if I had but one friend, who truly, deeply, and faithfully loved me, and if that friend were you, though we might be far apart, seldom to hear from each other, still more seldom to meet, though toil and trouble and vexation might surround me, still it would be too much happiness for me to dream of. Yet who can tell, said I within myself, as I proceeded up the park, who can tell what this 1 month may bring forth? I have lived nearly 23 years, and I have suffered much, and tasted little pleasure yet. Is it likely my life all through will be so clouded? Is it not possible that God may hear my prayers, disperse these gloomy shadows, and grant me some beams of heaven's sunshine yet? Will He entirely deny to me those blessings which are so freely given to others, who neither ask them nor acknowledge them when received? May I not still hope and trust? I did hope and trust for a while, but alas, alas! the time ebbed away, 1 week followed another, and, excepting one distant glimpse and 2 transient meetings, during which scarcely anything was said, while I was walking with Miss Matilda, I saw nothing of him, except, of course, at church. And now the last Sunday was come, and the last service. I was often on the point of melting into tears during the sermon. The last I was to hear from him, the best I should hear from anyone, I was well assured. It was over, the congregation were departing, and I must follow. I had then seen him, and heard his voice too, probably for the last time. In the churchyard Matilda was pounced upon by the two Misses Green. They had many inquiries to make about her sister, and I know not what besides. I only wished they would have done, that we might hasten back to Horton Lodge. I longed to seek the retirement of my own room, or some sequestered nook in the grounds, that I might deliver myself up to my feelings, to weep my last farewell, and lament my false hopes and vain delusions. Only this once, and then adieu to fruitless dreaming. Thenceforth, only sober, solid, sad reality should occupy my mind. But while I thus resolved, a low voice close beside me said, "I suppose you are going this week, Miss Grey?" "Yes," I replied. I was very much startled, and had I been at all hysterically inclined, I certainly should have committed myself in some way then. Thank God I was not. "Well," said Mr. Weston, "I want to bid you good bye. It is not likely I shall see you again before you go." "Good bye, Mr. Weston," I said. Oh, how I struggled to say it calmly. I gave him my hand. He retained it a few seconds in his. "It is possible we may meet again," said he. "Will it be of any consequence to you whether we do or not?" "Yes, I should be very glad to see you again." I could say no less. He kindly pressed my hand and went. Now I was happy again, though more inclined to burst into tears than ever. If I had been forced to speak at that moment, a succession of sobs would have inevitably ensued, and as it was, I could not keep the water out of my eyes. I walked along with Miss Murray, turning aside my face, and neglecting to notice several successive remarks, till she bawled out that I was either deaf or stupid, and then, having recovered my self-possession, as one awakened from a fit of abstraction, I suddenly looked up and asked what she had been saying. End of chapter 20. Chapter 21 of Agnes Grey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. Chapter 21. The School. I left Horton Lodge and went to join my mother in our new abode at A—. I found her well in health, resigned in spirit, and even cheerful, though subdued and sober in her general demeanour. We had only 3 boarders and half a dozen day pupils to commence with, but by due care and diligence we hoped ere long to increase the number of both. I set myself with befitting energy to discharge the duties of this new mode of life. I call it new, for there was, indeed, a considerable difference between working with my mother in a school of our own, and working as a hireling among strangers, despised and trampled upon by old and young. For the first few weeks I was by no means unhappy. It is possible we may meet again, and will it be of any consequence to you whether we do or not? Those words still rang in my ear, and rested on my heart. They were my secret solace and support. I shall see him again. He will come, or he will write. No promise, in fact, was too bright or too extravagant for hope to whisper in my ear. I did not believe half of what she told me. I pretended to laugh at it all. But I was far more credulous than I myself supposed. Otherwise, why did my heart leap up when a knock was heard at the front door, and the maid, who opened it, came to tell my mother a gentleman wished to see her? And why was I out of humour for the rest of the day? Because it proved to be a music master come to offer his services to our school. And what stopped my breath for a moment, when the postman having brought a couple of letters, my mother said, "Here, Agnes, this is for you," and threw one of them to me. And what made the hot blood rush into my face when I saw it was directed in a gentleman's hand? And why, oh, why did that cold, sickening sense of disappointment fall upon me, when I had torn open the cover and found it was only a letter from Mary, which, for some reason or other, her husband had directed for her? Was it then come to this, that I should be disappointed to receive a letter from my only sister, and because it was not written by a comparative stranger? Dear Mary! And she had written it so kindly, and thinking I should be so pleased to have it. I was not worthy to read it, and I believe, in my indignation against myself, I should have put it aside till I had schooled myself into a better frame of mind, and was become more deserving of the honour and privilege of its perusal. But there was my mother looking on, and wishful to know what news it contained. So I read it and delivered it to her, and then went into the schoolroom to attend to the pupils. But amidst the cares of copies and sums, in the intervals of correcting errors here, and reproving derelictions of duty there, I was inwardly taking myself to task with far sterner severity. "What a fool you must be," said my head to my heart, or my sterner to my softer self. "How could you ever dream that he would write to you? What grounds have you for such a hope? Or that he will see you, or give himself any trouble about you, or even think of you again? What grounds? And then Hope set before me that last, short interview, and repeated the words I had so faithfully treasured in my memory. Well, and what was there in that? Who ever hung his hopes upon so frail a twig? What was there in those words that any common acquaintance might not say to another? Of course, it was possible you might meet again. He might have said so if you had been going to New Zealand, but that did not imply any intention of seeing you. And then, as to the question that followed, anyone might ask that. And how did you answer? Merely with a stupid, commonplace reply, such as you would have given to Master Murray, or any one else you had been on tolerably civil terms with. But then, persisted Hope, the tone and manner in which he spoke. Oh, that is nonsense. He always speaks impressively, and at that moment there were the Greens and Miss Matilda Murray just before, and other people passing by, and he was obliged to stand close beside you, and to speak very low, unless he wished everybody to hear what he said, which, though it was nothing at all particular, of course, he would rather not. But then, above all, that emphatic yet gentle pressure of the hand, which seemed to say, "Trust me," and many other things besides, too delightful, almost too flattering, to be repeated even to oneself. Egregious folly, too absurd to require contradiction, mere inventions of the imagination, which you ought to be ashamed of. If you would but consider your own unattractive exterior, your unamiable reserve, your foolish diffidence, which must make you appear cold, dull, awkward, and perhaps ill-tempered too. If you had but rightly considered these from the beginning, you would never have harboured such presumptuous thoughts. And now that you have been so foolish, pray repent and amend, and let us have no more of it. I cannot say that I implicitly obeyed my own injunctions, but such reasoning as this became more and more effective as time wore on, and nothing was seen or heard of Mr. Weston, until at last I gave up hoping, for even my heart acknowledged it was all in vain. But still I would think of him. I would cherish his image in my mind, and treasure every word, look, and gesture that my memory could retain, and brood over his excellences and his peculiarities, and, in fact, all I had seen, heard, or imagined respecting him. Agnes, this sea air and change of scene do you no good, I think. I never saw you look so wretched. It must be that you sit too much, and allow the cares of the schoolroom to worry you. You must learn to take things easy, and to be more active and cheerful. You must take exercise whenever you can get it, and leave the most tiresome duties to me. They will only serve to exercise my patience, and, perhaps, try my temper a little. So said my mother, as we sat at work one morning during the Easter holidays. I assured her that my employments were not at all oppressive, that I was well, or, if there was anything amiss, it would be gone as soon as the trying months of spring were over. When summer came, I should be as strong and hearty as she could wish to see me. But inwardly her observation startled me. I knew my strength was declining, my appetite had failed, and I was grown listless and desponding. And if, indeed, he could never care for me, and I could never see him more, if I was forbidden to minister to his happiness, forbidden, forever, to taste the joys of love, to bless and to be blessed, then life must be a burden, and if my heavenly Father would call me away, I should be glad to rest. But it would not do to die and leave my mother. Selfish, unworthy daughter, to forget her for a moment. Was not her happiness committed in a great measure to my charge? And the welfare of our young pupils too? Should I shrink from the work that God had set before me, because it was not fitted to my taste? Did not He know best what I should do, and where I ought to labour? And should I long to quit His service before I had finished my task, and expect to enter into His rest without having laboured to earn it? No, by His help I will arise and address myself diligently to my appointed duty. If happiness in this world is not for me, I will endeavour to promote the welfare of those around me, and my reward shall be hereafter. So said I in my heart, and from that hour I only permitted my thoughts to wander to Edward Weston, or at least to dwell upon him now and then, as a treat for rare occasions. And whether it was really the approach of summer, or the effect of these good resolutions, or the lapse of time, or altogether tranquillity of mind was soon restored, and bodily health and vigour began likewise, slowly but surely, to return. Early in June I received a letter from Lady Ashby, late Miss Murray. She had written to me twice or thrice before, from the different stages of her bridal tour, always in good spirits, and professing to be very happy. I wondered every time that she had not forgotten me, in the midst of so much gaiety and variety of scene. At length, however, there was a pause, and it seemed she had forgotten me, for upwards of 7 months passed away, and no letter. Of course I did not break my heart about that, though I often wondered how she was getting on. And when this last epistle so unexpectedly arrived, I was glad enough to receive it. It was dated from Ashby Park, where she was come to settle at last, having previously divided her time between the Continent and the metropolis. She made many apologies for having neglected me so long, assured me she had not forgotten me, and had often intended to write, etc., etc., but had always been prevented by something. She acknowledged that she had been leading a very dissipated life, and I should think her very wicked and very thoughtless; but, notwithstanding that, she thought a great deal, and among other things, that she should vastly like to see me. "We have been several days here already," wrote she. "We have not a single friend with us, and are likely to be very dull. You know I never had a fancy for living with my husband like two turtles in a nest, were he the most delightful creature that ever wore a coat, so do take pity upon me and come. I suppose your midsummer holidays commence in June, the same as other people's. Therefore you cannot plead want of time, and you must and shall come. In fact, I shall die if you don't. I want you to visit me as a friend, and stay a long time. There is nobody with me, as I told you before, but Sir Thomas and old Lady Ashby. But you needn't mind them, they'll trouble us but little with their company. And you shall have a room to yourself, whenever you like to retire to it, and plenty of books to read when my company is not sufficiently amusing. I forget whether you like babies. If you do, you may have the pleasure of seeing mine. The most charming child in the world, no doubt, and all the more so that I am not troubled with nursing it. I was determined I wouldn't be bothered with that. Unfortunately, it is a girl, and Sir Thomas has never forgiven me. But, however, if you will only come, I promise you shall be its governess as soon as it can speak. and you shall bring it up in the way it should go, and make a better woman of it than its mamma. And you shall see my poodle too, a splendid little charmer, imported from Paris, and 2 fine Italian paintings of great value. I forget the artist. Doubtless you will be able to discover prodigious beauties in them, which you must point out to me, as I only admire by hearsay, and many elegant curiosities besides, which I purchased at Rome and elsewhere. And finally, you shall see my new home, the splendid house and grounds I used to covet so greatly. Alas, how far the promise of anticipation exceeds the pleasure of possession! There's a fine sentiment. I assure you I am become quite a grave old matron. Pray come, if it be only to witness the wonderful change. Write by return of post, and tell me when your vacation commences, and say that you will come the day after, and stay till the day before it closes, in mercy to yours affectionately, Rosalie Ashby. I showed this strange epistle to my mother, and consulted her on what I ought to do. She advised me to go, and I went, willing enough to see Lady Ashby and her baby too, and to do anything I could to benefit her, by consolation or advice, for I imagined she must be unhappy, or she would not have applied me thus. But feeling, as may readily be conceived, that, in accepting the invitation, I made a great sacrifice for her, and did violence to my feelings in many ways, instead of being delighted with the honourable distinction of being entreated by the baronet's lady to visit her as a friend. However, I determined my visit should be only for a few days at most, and will not deny that I derived some consolation from the idea that, as Ashby Park was not very far from Horton, I might possibly see Mr. Weston, or at least hear something about him. End of chapter 21.
Chapter 22 of Agnes Grey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. Chapter 22. The Visit. Ashby Park was certainly a very delightful residence. The mansion was stately without, commodious and elegant within. The park was spacious and beautiful, chiefly on account of its magnificent old trees, its stately herds of deer, its broad sheet of water, and the ancient woods that stretched beyond it, for there was no broken ground to give variety to the landscape, and but very little of that undulating swell which adds so greatly to the charm of park scenery. And so this was the place Rosalie Murray had so longed to call her own, that she must have a share of it, on whatever terms it might be offered, whatever price was to be paid for the title of mistress, and whoever was to be her partner in the honour and bliss of such a possession. Well, I am not disposed to censure her now. She received me very kindly, and, though I was a poor clergyman's daughter, a governess, and a schoolmistress, she welcomed me with unaffected pleasure to her home, and, what surprised me rather, took some pains to make my visit agreeable. I could see, it is true, that she expected me to be greatly struck with the magnificence that surrounded her, and, I confess, I was rather annoyed at her evident efforts to reassure me, and prevent me from being overwhelmed by so much grandeur, too much awed at the idea of encountering her husband and mother-in-law, or too much ashamed of my own humble appearance. I was not ashamed of it at all, for, though plain, I had taken good care not to look shabby or mean, and should have been pretty considerably at my ease, if my condescending hostess had not taken such manifest pains to make me so. And, as for the magnificence that surrounded her, nothing that met my eyes struck me or affected me half so much as her own altered appearance, whether from the influence of fashionable dissipation, or some other evil, A space of little more than 12 months had had the effect that might be expected from as many years, in reducing the plumpness of her form, the freshness of her complexion, the vivacity of her movements, and the exuberance of her spirits. I wished to know if she was unhappy, but I felt it was not my province to inquire. I might endeavour to win her confidence, but, if she chose to conceal her matrimonial cares from me, I would trouble her with no obtrusive questions. I, therefore, at first, confined myself to a few general inquiries about her health and welfare, and a few commendations on the beauty of the park, and of the little girl that should have been a boy, a small delicate infant of 7 or 8 weeks old, whom its mother seemed to regard with no remarkable degree of interest or affection, though full as much as I expected her to show. Shortly after my arrival, she commissioned her maid to conduct me to my room, and see that I had everything I wanted. It was a small, unpretending, but sufficiently comfortable apartment. When I descended thence, having divested myself of all travelling encumbrances, and arranged my toilet with due consideration for the feelings of my lady hostess, she conducted me herself to the room I was to occupy when I chose to be alone, or when she was engaged with visitors, or obliged to be with her mother-in-law, or otherwise prevented, as she said, from enjoying the pleasure of my society. It was a quiet, tidy little sitting room, and I was not sorry to be provided with such a harbour of refuge. "And some time," said she, "I will show you the library. I never examined its shelves, but, I dare say, it is full of wise books, and you may go and burrow among them whenever you please. And now you shall have some tea. It will soon be dinner time, but I thought, as you are accustomed to dine at 1, you would perhaps like better to have a cup of tea about this time, and to dine when we lunch. And then, you know, you can have your tea in this room, and that will save you from having to dine with Lady Ashby and Sir Thomas, which would be rather awkward. At least, not awkward, but rather, you know what I mean. I thought you mightn't like it so well, especially as we may have other ladies and gentlemen to dine with us occasionally." "Certainly," said I would much rather have it as you say, and, if you have no objection, I should prefer having all my meals in this room." "Why so?" "Because, I imagine, it would be more agreeable to Lady Ashby and Sir Thomas." "Nothing of the kind." "At any rate it would be more agreeable to me." She made some faint objections, but soon conceded, and I could see that the proposal was a considerable relief to her. "Now, come into the drawing room," said she. "There's the dressing bell, but I won't go yet. It's no use dressing when there's no one to see you, and I want to have a little discourse." The drawing room was certainly an imposing apartment, and very elegantly furnished, but I saw its young mistress glance towards me as we entered, as if to notice how I was impressed by the spectacle, and accordingly I determined to preserve an aspect of stony indifference, as if I saw nothing at all remarkable. But this was only for a moment. Immediately conscience whispered, why should I disappoint her to save my pride? No, rather let me sacrifice my pride to give her a little innocent gratification. And I honestly looked round, and told her it was a noble room, and very tastefully furnished. She said little, but I saw she was pleased. She showed me her fat French poodle, that lay curled up on a silk cushion, and the 2 fine Italian paintings, which, however, she would not give me time to examine, but, saying I must look at them some other day, insisted upon my admiring the little jewelled watch she had purchased in Geneva, and then she took me round the room to point out sundry articles of vertu she had brought from Italy, an elegant little timepiece, and several busts, small graceful figures, and vases, all beautifully carved in white marble. She spoke of these with animation, and heard my admiring comments with a smile of pleasure, that soon, however, vanished, and was followed by a melancholy sigh, as if in consideration of the insufficiency of all such baubles to the happiness of the human heart, and their woeful inability to supply its insatiate demands. Then, stretching herself upon a couch, she motioned me to a capacious easy chair that stood opposite, not before the fire, but before a wide open window, for it was summer, be it remembered, a sweet warm evening in the latter half of June. I sat for a moment in silence, enjoying the still, pure air, and the delightful prospect of the park that lay before me, rich in verdure and foliage, and basking in yellow sunshine, relieved by the long shadows of declining day. But I must take advantage of this pause. I had inquiries to make, and, like the substance of a lady's postscript, the most important must come last. So I began with asking after Mr. and Mrs. Murray, and Miss Matilda and the young gentleman. I was told that papa had the gout, which made him very ferocious, and that he would not give up his choice wines, and his substantial dinners and suppers, and had quarrelled with his physician, because the latter had dared to say that no medicine could cure him while he lived so freely; that mamma and the rest were well. Matilda was still wild and reckless, but she had got a fashionable governess, and was considerably improved in her manners, and soon to be introduced to the world. And John and Charles, now at home for the holidays, were, by all accounts, fine, bold, unruly, mischievous boys. "And how are the other people getting on?" said I. "The Greens, for instance?" "Ah, Mr. Green is heartbroken, you know," replied she, with a languid smile. "He hasn't gotten over his disappointment yet, and never will, I suppose. He's doomed to be an old bachelor. And his sisters are doing their best to get married." "And the Melthams?" "Oh, they're jogging on as usual, I suppose. But I know very little about any of them, except Harry," said she, blushing slightly, and smiling again. "I saw a great deal of him while we were in London; for as soon as he heard we were there, he came up under pretence of visiting his brother, and either followed me, like a shadow, wherever I went, or met me, like a reflection, at every turn. You needn't look so shocked, Miss Grey. I was very discreet, I assure you; but, you know, one can't help being admired. Poor fellow, he was not my only worshipper, though he was certainly the most conspicuous, and, I think, the most devoted among them all. And that detestable ahem and Sir Thomas chose to take offence at him, or my profuse expenditure, or something, I don't exactly know what, and hurried me down to the country at a moment's notice, where I am to play the hermit, I suppose, for life." And she bit her lip, and frowned vindictively upon the fair domain she had once so coveted to call her own. "And Mr. Hatfield?" said I. "What is become of him?" Again she brightened up, and answered gaily, "Oh, he made up to an elderly spinster, and married her not long since, weighing her heavy purse against her faded charms, and expecting to find that solace in gold which was denied him in love. Ha, ha!" "Well, and I think that's all. Except Mr. Weston, what is he doing?" "I don't know, I'm sure. He's gone from Horton." "How long since? And where is he gone to?" "I know nothing about him," replied she, yawning, "except that he went about a month ago. I never asked where." I would have asked whether it was to a living or merely another curacy, but thought it better not. "And the people made a great rout about his leaving," continued she, "much to Mr. Hatfield's displeasure; for Hatfield didn't like him, because he had too much influence with the common people, and because he was not sufficiently tractable and submissive to him, and for some other unpardonable sins, I don't know what. But now I positively must go and dress. The second bell will ring directly, and if I come to dinner in this guise, I shall never hear the end of it from Lady Ashby. It is a strange thing that one can't be mistress in one's own house. Just ring the bell, and I'll send for my maid, and tell them to get you some tea. Only think of that intolerable woman." "Who? Your maid?" "No, my mother-in-law, and my unfortunate mistake. Instead of letting her take herself off to some other house, as she offered to do when I married, I was fool enough to ask her to live here still, and direct the affairs of the house for me; because, in the first place, I hoped we should spend the greater part of the year in town, and in the second place, being so young and inexperienced, I was frightened at the idea of having a houseful of servants to manage, and dinners to order, and parties to entertain, and all the rest of it, and I thought she might assist me with her experience, never dreaming she would prove a usurper, a tyrant, an incubus, a spy, and everything else that's detestable. I wish she was dead." She then turned to give her orders to the footman, who had been standing bolt upright within the door for the last half minute, and had heard the latter part of her animadversions, and, of course, made his own reflections upon them, notwithstanding the inflexible wooden countenance he thought proper to preserve in the drawing-room. On my remarking afterwards that he must have heard her, she replied, "Oh, no matter. I never care about the footmen. They are mere automatons. It's nothing to them what their superiors say or do. They won't dare to repeat it. And as to what they think, if they presume to think at all, of course nobody cares for that. It would be a pretty thing indeed if we were to be tongue-tied by our servants." So saying, she ran off to make her hasty toilet, leaving me to pilot my way back to my sitting room, where, in due time, I was served with a cup of tea. After that, I sat musing on Lady Ashby's past and present condition, and on what little information I had obtained respecting Mr. Weston, and the small chance there was of ever seeing or hearing anything more of him throughout my quiet, drab colour life, which, henceforth, seemed to offer no alternative between positive rainy days and days of dull grey clouds without downfall. At length, however, I began to weary of my thoughts, and to wish I knew where to find the library my hostess had spoken of, and to wonder whether I was to remain there, doing nothing till bedtime. As I was not rich enough to possess a watch, I could not tell how time was passing, except by observing the slowly lengthening shadows from the window, which presented a side view, including a corner of the park, a clump of trees whose topmost branches had been colonized by an innumerable company of noisy rooks, and a high wall with a massive wooden gate, no doubt communicating with the stable yard, as a broad carriage road swept up to it from the park. The shadow of this wall soon took possession of the whole of the ground as far as I could see, forcing the golden sunlight to retreat inch by inch, and at last take refuge in the very tops of the trees. Ere long, even they were left in shadow, the shadow of the distant hills, or of the earth itself, and, in sympathy for the busy citizens of the rookery, I regretted to see their habitation, so lately bathed in glorious light, reduced to the sombre, workaday hue of the lower world, or of my own world within. For a moment, such birds as soared above the rest might still receive the lustre on their wings, which imparted to their sable plumage the hue and brilliance of deep red gold. At last that too departed. Twilight came stealing on. The rocks became more quiet. I became more weary, and wished I was going home tomorrow. At length it grew dark, and I was thinking of ringing for a candle, and betaking myself to bed, when my hostess appeared, with many apologies for having neglected me so long, and laying all the blame upon that nasty old woman, as she called her mother-in-law. "If I didn't sit with her in the drawing room while Sir Thomas is taking his wine," said she would never forgive me. And then, if I leave the room the instant he comes, as I have done once or twice, it is an unpardonable offence against her dear Thomas. She never showed such disrespect to her husband; and as for affection, wives never think of that nowadays, she supposes. But things were different in her time. As if there was any good to be done by staying in the room, when he does nothing but grumble and scold when he's in a bad humour, talk disgusting nonsense when he's in a good one, and go to sleep on the sofa when he's too stupid for either, which is most frequently the case now, when he has nothing to do but to sot over his wine. But could you not try to occupy his mind with something better, and engage him to give up such habits? I am sure you have powers of persuasion, and qualifications for amusing a gentleman, which many ladies would be glad to possess. And so you think I would lay myself out for his amusement? No, that's not my idea of a wife. It's the husband's part to please the wife, not hers to please him, and if he isn't satisfied with her as she is, and thankful to possess her too, he isn't worthy of her, that's all. And as for persuasion, I assure you I shan't trouble myself with that. I've enough to do to bear with him as he is, without attempting to work a reform. I'm sorry I left you so long alone, Miss Grey. How have you passed the time?" "Chiefly in watching the rooks." "Mercy, how dull you must have been! I really must show you the library. And you must ring for everything you want, just as you would in an inn, and make yourself comfortable. I have selfish reasons for wishing to make you happy, because I want you to stay with me, and not fulfill your horrid threat of running away in a day or two. Don't let me keep you out of the drawing room any longer tonight, for at present I am tired and wish to go to bed." End of chapter 22.
Chapter 23 of Agnes Grey. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Gesine. Agnes Grey by Anne Brontë. Chapter 23. The Park. I came down a little before 8 next morning, as I knew by the striking of a distant clock. There was no appearance of breakfast. I waited above an hour before it came, still vainly longing for access to the library, and after that lonely repast was concluded, I waited again about an hour and a half in great suspense and discomfort, uncertain what to do. At length Lady Ashby came to bid me good morning. She informed me that she had only just breakfasted, and now wanted me to take an early walk with her in the park. She asked how long I had been up, and on receiving my answer expressed the deepest regret, and again promised to show me the library. I suggested she had better do so at once, and then there would be no further trouble either with remembering or forgetting. She complied, on condition that I would not think of reading or bothering with the books now, for she wanted to show me the gardens, and take a walk in the park with me before it became too hot for enjoyment, which indeed was nearly the case already. Of course I readily assented, and we took our walk accordingly. As we were strolling in the park, talking of what my companion had seen and heard during her travelling experience, a gentleman on horseback rode up and passed us. As he turned in passing and stared me full in the face, I had a good opportunity of seeing what he was like. He was tall, thin, and wasted, with a slight stoop in the shoulders, a pale face but somewhat blotchy and disagreeably red about the eyelids, plain features, and a general appearance of languor and flatness, relieved by a sinister expression in the mouth and the dull, soulless eyes. "I detest that man," whispered Lady Ashby, with bitter emphasis, as he slowly trotted by. "Who is it?" I asked, unwilling to suppose that she should so speak of her husband. "Sir Thomas Ashby," she replied, with dreary composure. "And do you detest him, Miss Murray?" said I, for I was too much shocked to remember her name at the moment. "Yes, I do, Miss Grey, and despise him too, and if you knew him you would not blame me." "But you knew what he was before you married him." "No, I only thought so; I did not half know him really. I know you warned me against it, and I wish I had listened to you, but it's too late to regret that now. And besides, mamma ought to have known better than either of us, and she never said anything against it, quite the contrary. And then I thought he adored me, and would let me have my own way; he did pretend to do so at first, but now he does not care a bit about me. Yet I should not care for that; he might do as he pleased, if I might only be free to amuse myself, and to stay in London, or have a few friends down here, but he will do as he pleases, and I must be a prisoner and a slave. The moment he saw I could enjoy myself without him, and that others knew my value better than himself, the selfish wretch began to accuse me of coquetry and extravagance, and to abuse Harry Meltham, whose shoes he was not worthy to clean. And then he must needs have me down in the country, to lead the life of a nun, lest I should dishonour him or bring him to ruin, as if he had not been 10 times worse every way, with his betting book and his gaming table, and his opera girls, and his Lady this and Mrs. that, yes, and the bottles of wine, and glasses of brandy and water too. Oh, I would give 10,000 worlds to be Miss Murray again. It is too bad to feel life, health, and beauty wasting away, unfelt and unenjoyed, for such a brute as that," exclaimed she, fairly bursting into tears in the bitterness of her vexation. Of course I pitied her exceedingly, as well for her false idea of happiness and disregard of duty, as for the wretched partner with whom her fate was linked. I said what I could to comfort her, and offered such counsels as I thought she most required, advising her first, by gentle reasoning, by kindness, example, and persuasion, to try to ameliorate her husband; and then, when she had done all she could, if she still found him incorrigible, to endeavour to abstract herself from him, to wrap herself up in her own integrity, and trouble herself as little about him as possible. I exhorted her to seek consolation in doing her duty to God and man, to put her trust in heaven, and solace herself with the care and nurture of her little daughter, assuring her she would be amply rewarded by witnessing its progress in strength and wisdom, and receiving its genuine affection. "But I can't devote myself entirely to a child," said she. "It may die, which is not at all improbable. But with care many a delicate infant has become a strong man or woman." "But it may grow so intolerably like its father that I shall hate it." "That is not likely. It is a little girl, and strongly resembles its mother." "No matter, I should like it better if it were a boy, only that its father will leave it no inheritance that he can possibly squander away. What pleasure can I have in seeing a girl grow up to eclipse me, and enjoy those pleasures that I am forever debarred from? But supposing I could be so generous as to take delight in this, still it is only a child, and I can't centre all my hopes in a child. That is only one degree better than devoting oneself to a dog. And as for all the wisdom and goodness you have been trying to instill into me, that is all very right and proper, I dare say, and if I were some 20 years older, I might fructify by it, but people must enjoy themselves when they are young, and if others won't let them, why, they must hate them for it. The best way to enjoy yourself is to do what is right and hate nobody. The end of religion is not to teach us how to die, but how to live, and the earlier you become wise and good, the more happiness you secure. And now, Lady Ashby, I have one more piece of advice to offer you, which is, that you will not make an enemy of your mother-in-law. Don't get into the way of holding her at arm's length, and regarding her with jealous distrust. I never saw her, but I have heard good as well as evil respecting her, and I imagine that, though cold and haughty in her general demeanour, and even exacting in her requirements, she has strong affections for those who can reach them, and, though so blindly attached to her son, she is not without good principles, or incapable of hearing reason. If you would but conciliate her a little, and adopt a friendly, open manner, and even confide your grievances to her, real grievances, such as you have a right to complain of, it is my firm belief that she would, in time, become your faithful friend, and a comfort and support to you, instead of the incubus you describe her. But I fear my advice had little effect upon the unfortunate young lady, and finding I could render myself so little serviceable, my residence at Ashby Park became doubly painful. But still I must stay out that day and the following one, as I had promised to do so, though, resisting all entreaties and inducements to prolong my visit further, I insisted upon departing the next morning, affirming that my mother would be lonely without me, and that she impatiently expected my return. Nevertheless, it was with a heavy heart that I bade adieu to poor Lady Ashby, and left her in her princely home. It was no slight additional proof of her unhappiness that she should so cling to the consolation of my presence, and earnestly desire the company of one whose general tastes and ideas were so little congenial to her own, whom she had completely forgotten in her hour of prosperity, and whose presence would be rather a nuisance than a pleasure, if she could but have half her heart's desire. Chapter 24